We are super proud and excited to have two entrepreneurs who are both putting modern technology to work in dealing with and eliminating gender pay gaps, gender differences that shouldn't be there. Tuula, please take it away.
Thank you, Birger. And so let's switch gears. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation about Icelandic language and culture and the opportunity of technology. So, such a great dialogue. And we're continuing with another theme, but equally important and interesting. And we have quite a catchy, title to our talk here this morning. We're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the Nordic paradox. And it's a commonly known fact that the Nordic countries are very advanced in their kind of gender equality practices and policies. And certainly when I moved here to the United States from Finland, I realized what a privilege we have with our longer maternity leaves, with our universal childcare policies like that really support gender equality. And then at the same time, there's research saying that, these more progressive policies in the Nordics have actually created a more segregated workforce, which I find very interesting and paradoxical. And I guess, like with everything else, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And what we are here today to explore is data. What does data say about, what is the truth and reality, and how can we use data to solve the most important issues that we could do when it comes to equality and diversity. So with that, I would really like to turn it over to my esteemed panelists, and would like to ask you, Margrét and Marie, to introduce yourselves.
Sure.
You should go first.
I will start. So my name is Margrét Bjarnadóttir. I have a PhD in what's called operation research. Nobody knows what operation research is, but it's literally how we can use data and models to support better decision making. So I'm an associate professor of management science and statistics at the University of Maryland, and I'm also the founder of PayAnalytics, which is helping organizations close their demographic pay gaps.
Awesome. Well, my name is Marie. I'm actually a medical doctor by profession. I trained as a surgeon for many years. I have a PhD within colorectal surgery, which is absolutely not relevant to what we're talking about. But I've also always been very passionate about diversity and inclusion and women's rights in particular. So I've been doing a lot of work on the side there. And I was invited, because of that work, I was invited to the UN back in 2014 when they launched their biggest gender equality campaign. Where Emma Watson gave a speech that has been going down in the history books as sort of the beginning of the fourth feminist wave. And she said a lot of things that I was very inspired by, and one of them was, if not now, when? If not me, then who? And this was back in 2014. Gender equality and diversity was not on the agenda then, not in the US, not in the Nordics. And as a young female surgeon in a very, very male-dominated field, I felt that gender equality was definitely not something that we had achieved. So, long story short, I wanted to address that. I started a campaign in the Nordics to address unconscious gender bias, which went pretty well. And I can talk more about that later. But as a result, I saw a huge opportunity. I saw that we need to work with this very differently than we do today. And I started EqualityCheck, which is a tech company where we do some of the same things, but we're using data to identify where the problems are in companies, where they can benefit more from being more diverse, and then we add more evidence-based solutions to improve.
Thank you, and great to have you both here today. So then let's go in a little deeper, and if you think about this landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Nordics and globally, what have you seen and observed in the past few years? And maybe we start with Margrét.
Sure. I think one of the biggest changes that we are seeing in DEI is we are going away from just thinking about, equality in terms of binary gender. So not only are we moving, and we're already talking about diverse definitions of gender, but we're also moving towards thinking more broadly about other dimensions of demographics that impact everything, right? So there's one thing that we actually do better. So I spent half my time in the US and half the time in Iceland. And one of the things that we are more comfortable talking about in the US, actually, compared to the Nordics, is race and ethnicity. So when we think about what is happening with the European legislation right now, is that it's really focused on gender. I was really happy to see that we managed to broaden out a little bit the definition of gender in the new EU Transparency Act. But I think what's happening over in the Nordics, and now I'm putting a little bit my pay equity hat on, is that the businesses are almost ahead of the legislation. So when we work with organizations and they close the gender pay gap, they don't just say put a, wrap it up and say we're done. They immediately start thinking about, okay, which other dimensions of my workforce should I be thinking about? So I think the change in terms of this broader DEI agenda is really, at least over in Europe and the Nordic, is coming from the business community more than the legislative process. And we can learn, I think, a couple of things from the US on just how we think about these things there, because we're not as comfortable talking about it.
That's interesting. And I would say, having worked here in the US now for the past 8 years, the private sector is a force here as well. Marie? Yeah, definitely. And I think that I echo what you say. And then I think another distinguished difference now compared to just 2 years ago is that diversity and inclusion has been seen sort of as a niche that you do because it's a nice thing to do, but it doesn't really, it's not a business core in any way. And there's been a huge change there just couple 2 years, where we now see that companies are starting to see that this is not only a competitive advantage, it's going to be, it's a competitive necessity to succeed in the future, and that's why the companies and business community now is pushing this on the agenda, and we see that just a few years ago, diversity and inclusion was something that companies wanted to talk about, but it was a lot of talk and no one really did anything, and we didn't really see any results. According to McKinsey, this is a statistics that's a couple of years old, but according to them, only 24% of the companies that implement measures see effect, which is a really, really poor success rate. If I had, as a surgeon, had that success rate, my patients wouldn't be very happy. But it's statistics that we've been sort of happy with when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because it's something that people wanted to talk about, and they didn't really see why they had to see results. And now that is changing, so now companies, they need to see results, and I think that's why we see companies like us, like you, thriving, because to see results, you need data, you need to make the right diagnosis, you need to understand what's actually happening, and you need to apply measures that work. So I think that's another positive thing that means it's a good time for us to be in this field right now. And then another thing which I think is interesting in terms of the differences between Europe and US when it comes to the broader diversity span and the regulations is that it's definitely sailing up as an important trend. In Europe, we have a bit of a different story and history when it comes to this compared to the US. Many of our countries were occupied by the Nazi German Reich. And that's one of the discussions that's going now in Norway, for example, when it was actually the lists that the Norwegian police had with who were Jews and who were not Jews. Those were the lists that the police used to deport Jews to the Germany. So that's one of the major reasons that many Nordic governments are very, very afraid of storing that kind of data, because it has been misused previously in very bad ways. So, but that's another way why it's good for companies like us, because we can sort of help bypass that, and we can help broadening the diversity spectrum without having to store that kind of data for the companies. So you already started with the positive, Marie. So let's talk a little bit about what do we think that the rest of the world can learn from the Nordics? Like, what are we doing well in this space?
I'm happy to go. Okay, well, I think one of the things that you said about the Nordic paradox, it's interesting, and what the Nordic paradox says is that because of the measures, we actually have a more gender segregated workplace, which is that is not necessarily true, and I think we're touching there upon one of the things that happens very often within diversity and inclusion is that we confuse correlation with causality. So what the measures that we have in the Nordics have facilitated is to get women into the workforce. So we have a very, very high percentage of women working in the Nordics, whereas in other countries, very often when you have kids, women have to stay at home. I think having those kind of measures, allowing everyone to have the same opportunities, that is definitely the right way to go in terms of getting more equality. But then even in the Nordics, we have some structural differences for cultural and historic reasons, which means that people are not treated or seen the same way. And those structural differences is what we have to tackle. So the measures that we have, I think it's very speculative to say that they are actually causing the gender segregation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so maybe I can expand a little bit, because I was asked to be on this panel, and when I saw the title, I started by Googling what is the DEI paradox. But now I know. But in my mind, it isn't that much of a paradox. So for those of you who didn't Google the topic of the panel, the DEI paradox is the fact that we, in the Nordics, we are ranked on top on all these equality measures, but still we are lacking female representation in the top, right, in business. So in my mind, and then there's the paradox, right? So in my mind, it isn't that much of a paradox, but more a signal that we are not there yet. Right, so we are on a journey, and we might be, leading the way, when it comes to equality. It just means that there's still glass ceilings that we need to break through, and we are working on it. And then, in terms of, because your original question was, okay, what can the rest of the world learn from us? So, if I put on my academic hat, I've been taking part in a lot of panels on women in tech. Right? And women in tech in the US, because I'm a professor here in the US, and just the reality that faces young women in America in tech is very different from what the reality that they're facing in the Nordics. So the conversations that we are having in the US, those are conversations we would have been having in the 80s in the Nordics. They are expressing concerns that there isn't daycare, that they can't afford to keep their job and have children. And thankfully, in the Nordics, we have moved past this, right? So I think number 1, 2, and 3, that's something we need to make this a more, if we think about, what can the US learn, we need to make this society more women-friendly and family-friendly, and support women in having access to be active participants in the workforce.
And I think, and following that, also seeing that having children is not just the mother's burden, because I think that's another thing that we're starting to become better at in the Nordics, that the fathers also have parental leave. The fathers also sometimes have to go early because they have to pick up in kindergarten. So this is not something that's only limiting women, it's something that limits parents, and something that should be facilitated for everyone. So that there isn't actually a burden to be a mother more than being a father.
Yeah, I sometimes, sorry, and then
yeah,
I
keep going, yes.
yeah. So sometimes when I'm having these conversations in the US, I sometimes switch the conversation around and say, instead of talking about, sharing the burden, let's talk about the right of the fathers to be in their children's lives. And then we are having a very different conversation. So maybe that's the conversation that we need to be having, is that, the fathers have the rights to be involved in raising their children.
And my learning has been that when you make the society or workplace better for women by creating some of these systems of equality, maybe understanding in your current system what causes inequality, and then how do you break that and build a more systematic way to, let's say, gender equality, equal pay, or supporting any diverse group, it makes the culture and the society better for everybody. So, it's this intersectionality that when one group wins, actually everybody wins.
And I think that's where you also, you come back to why is this time different? Because companies, so the business community, see that this is a competitive necessity. Why do they see that? Because the war for talent is now coming up in all countries. And talent today, what they look for in a workplace is they look for an inclusive culture. They look for a work-life balance that's working. Fathers today, at least in the Nordics, they want to be included in their children's lives. So this is also a part of the competitive edge around diversity and inclusion, which is actually driving the change in the companies.
Absolutely. It's no longer a nice to have, but it's like a basic requirement for a company to succeed. So then you both are wonderful entrepreneurs. So now I would like to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit about your companies. And really, you know, Birger and already went there, there's reason to be optimistic. So you know, how can your companies help drive positive change? And either one can start.
Sure, I can jump on it.
Yes.
Yeah. So what do I do? So with my company, so my company is called PayAnalytics, and we are really focused on pay equity and helping organizations close their demographic pay gaps. So what we have built is a cloud platform that enables companies to measure their pay gaps. And here I think it's so important to think about there's not just one pay gap, there are pay gaps along all the different demographic dimensions, right? And we also need to think about there is pay gaps across the organization and then within each groups of employees. So what we have built is a robust approach that is both effective and fair to close all of these different pay gaps, and we are seeing great results. So our initial development partner drove down their pay gap to 0% in a matter of months after struggling to reach that goal for years. We work with organizations as large as 140,000 employees that looked at their data and drove down their pay gaps to less than 1% across 50 subsidiaries in 9 months. So we are seeing great results. So what we do at the core is that we help you measure your pay gaps. We identify who needs a raise and how large those raises need to be. And then we also help you integrate pay equity into all of your compensation processes so that these gaps don't come creeping back. Because every organization is a thriving organism and there are changes. So every decision that you make also impacts your pay equity. So you need to integrate pay equity into your processes. So that's the core of what we do.
Thank you. Marie?
Super impressive. So we do partly in the same field. We're a Norwegian-based startup. And like I said initially a little bit, what we see, which is great, is that companies, they want to change, they need to change. The problem is that they don't know how to do it, and they don't know why they have the problems they have, and they don't have the correct data to correct it, like you said initially in your introduction. So what we do is that we've sort of applied the medical way of thinking around this. When I came into the field, I was very surprised to see that there was a huge lack of evidence-driven approach, huge lack of data-driven approach, and very, very poor results in companies. So what we do is that we help companies identify, understand, and act on their diversity and inclusion problems or opportunities. We collect 3 different data sets. We collect structural data, which is partly pay, partly advancement, partly seniority, etc., parental leave. And then we collect demographic data on a broad diversity scale because, like you said, in the Nordics and in Europe, it's harder for companies to collect demographic data because of GDPR, because of the culture, because of the history. As a third party, we can collect that data on behalf of the companies. And then we collect cultural data, which is how you thrive, if you feel included, if you're thinking about quitting. And then we get huge data sets, and based on that, we can make a very, very specific diagnosis on where the problem in the organization is, what's the lowest hanging fruit, where will you see most effect if you improve, and then we pair it with evidence-based solutions so that companies know what the problem is, why they have it, and what they should do to improve. And we do this in tech architecture and then help companies improve. And we are based now in Norway. We started selling our product last year. We have more than 50 companies in Norway that are clients, many of them very large, both Nordic and international companies. And we are spending the next few months just to making sure everything works, and then we're looking to scale abroad as well. Fantastic.
I would like to make it a little bit more interactive. So we have a little bit time also if there are questions in the room. So if anybody, has a question they would like to address to our esteemed panelists, now would be a great time. And maybe I'll ask one more question if anybody wants to think about their question. And this really, for you to kind of go to the next level with your companies, what would you need?
So I can go first.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, I can tell you where we're at. So we're at 100 clients. We are in 40 countries, every continent except Antarctica. So what do we need? More marketing and sales. And that's what we are working on. So we are backed by Eyrir, and we are basically scaling up our sales and marketing across the world.
Yeah, well, it's as a startup, you always need a lot of things. Right now, we're fundraising to be able to optimize our product. But I think the most exciting thing about being in this space right now is that there's a huge opportunity span because I think this is going to be the next sort of global mega trend. We've seen it with climate, etc. And so one of the exciting things now is also to understand what problems do they have, what problems do they actually have, what problems do they feel that they have, how do you solve them, and how do you do that in a way that's scalable. So that's one of the other things that we spend a lot of time on now is to understanding that. And so that's one of the things we need, I think, as all startups working within this field is to see how can you do this in a way that's super effective, that's super easy, and that gives a lot of outcome for the clients to make sure that this is actually something that is going to be done in companies, and to see that we can, in the future, we can assure that there are equal workplaces for everyone on a very commercial journey getting there.
Did we get any questions from the room? Yes, okay, here we have a microphone, Bodil, we have a microphone coming to you.
Thank you to all of you on the panel. This is super interesting. I'm from Denmark. I lived in the United States for over 30 years by now. And in the time I've been here, I've found that within large companies, there's a lot of secrecy around pay and compensation, and there are a lot of individual considerations for what you're paid, how you're paid, why you're paid what you are. And even in some cases, you can be terminated for sharing your salary or your compensations with others. So this is a super important topic and initiative, and I'm curious what the reception of these initiatives, and especially for you, Dr. Bjarnadóttir, being in the U.S., what have you seen from the U.S., from U.S. companies, employers, in terms of their willingness to implement, initiatives like what you have, and if there's an appetite for even starting to talk about pay equity?
It's a great question. Thank you, Bodil.
Yeah, no, I think there's great appetite. So I would almost split this in two. So there's a lot of legislative change happening, and then there's a lot of things happening within the corporate world. So for example, as an example of the legislative change that is happening in the US, is all happening at the state level. And for example, in Massachusetts now, they have a new legislation, well, it's probably 2 or 3 years old by now, that actually allows organizations to measure their gap. And if they act on it and fix it, they can't be sued based on that evidence. So what is holding pay equity back in the US is that if you measure a pay gap, and let's say it's 6% or 8% or 4%, and that the word got out, well, you have a legal case coming your way. And that is really hindering organization being able to look at their data proactively, fix issues, etc. So the way things are set up now is that typically there's a legal counsel in the middle. So that's the traditional setup, but I think it's changing fast. So one example is that Massachusetts is trying to take that away so that you can actually look at your data and fix things, so to accelerate change. And then, Colorado, etc. There's a lot of change happening that is trying to push this, including, so you mentioned that you're not allowed to talk about your salary and you can be terminated. There's numerous, the last time I counted, I think that is forbidden now in 23 states. But there's one state that I'm not going to mention that has forbidden this to be forbidden. But I would say there's a lot of action happening to try to move this forward. And then the second part of your question was about the appetite. I think it's increasing. So we have a lot of US customers. So we can split up our US customers, into legal firms that are using our solution for their clients. But then we have a number of clients that are just actively using our product to make sure that they are paying fairly. So it's on the uptick. There's some progress to be made, but I'm optimistic, and I think, just like Marie was saying, that if you're not able to your employees to explain how you're addressing pay equity, you're falling behind.
Anything you would like to add, Marie?
No, I think that was very spot on.
So we have another question, and I think I'm conscious of time, but maybe we can do one more question. So I think we had here a hand in the back who was first, though. Oh, is that Christina? Yeah, okay. It's hard to recognize in the mask, but that is Christina, okay.
Thank you so much. Super interesting panel. Thank you for being here and sharing all your wisdom with us. I'm really curious, who are you approaching when you're doing your sales? Are there CEOs or HR or corporate counsel who come to you to help them solve this issue and this challenge? And then secondly, what sizes of companies are you talking to, and who are actually taking this on, fully?
I'm happy to start.
Yes, thank you.
It's a very good question, and what that question is, in essence, is how mature are the companies we sell to? And we sell to all the people that you talked about, depending on how mature companies are. And in very mature companies, they see diversity and inclusion as a competitive edge, and they want to improve their performance. And in those companies, we often talk to the management and to the CEO. In the companies that are a little less mature, it's sometimes more about being risk to avoid risks like reputational risk or financial risk, and then in the least mature companies, it's more about being compliant with the legislation. So in the most mature companies, we talk with the CEO or the more strategic management. In slightly less mature companies, we talk with HR, and in the least mature, we talk with those that work with compliance, and then we sell them in there, and then we help them sort of push them up in the maturity ladder. And we sell to, I think it's not, we're asked a lot, what kind of clients do you have? And it's hard to say a specific kind of clients, because it's so broad. So we sell to companies with 50 employees and companies with 10,000 employees just in Norway, and in companies that are large international companies as well. So I think it's more about industry. It's mostly within the business community, and especially within the business community where attracting talent is very important. And we've seen also that being sort of widen just the past couple of years. So industries that were very immature 2 years ago are now very eager clients of us, because they see that, whoa, we really missed out on this trend. We didn't understand that it was going to be this big, and now we desperately need help to get back in the game.
Yeah, just to answer the same. So typically we are selling to the heads of HR and comp, sometimes to the chief finance officer, less to the legal departments. They are more, or the internal counsel, they're more kind of taking in to approve the contracts. And then in terms of clients, anywhere, I think our smallest client has 83 employees, and our largest has over 140,000 employees.
I saw so many hands now raised when you guys are warming up. So the good news is that Marie and Margrét are here during the day. So if we ever get to a break, please reach out to them, and they will be happy to answer more questions. And I've so enjoyed this discussion with you, and I think future is bright with entrepreneurs like you. So I'm going to give you more power. And as a closing question, ask, what's the one thing that, if you could change in this world of diversity and equality, what would you change?
Yeah, that's a big question.
It's a big question.
I think one of the biggest obstacles that we have is our perception of it. Is that we think that we We think that we're all equal. We think that we have the same, we play in the same playing fields. As long as we do give everyone the same measures or do the same thing for everyone, it's going to play out the same way, which is not the case. So I think the one thing that I would have wanted to change is that people to be aware of their biases, of their unconscious stereotypes, of how we do treat people differently, and we don't want to do it, but we do.
Yes.
And recognizing it is a very powerful step in the journey of becoming more equal.
That's so well said. Like, most change starts with awareness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about you, Margrét?
Like you said, I couldn't have said it any better. So maybe add on top of it, if we could remove the regulatory burden, that would make my life easier. But thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Thank you both for being here today and for the wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.